Hey, what's going on guys? My name is Caleb Lancaster, and in this video we'll be talking about Adobe Lightroom. Whenever I first started taking and editing photos, I was actually using Adobe Photoshop to edit everything that goes from white balance correction, color grading, saturating the image, sharpening the image, adding any like stylistic adjustments like film grain or faded looks. Everything was done in Adobe Photoshop, which don't get me wrong, it can be done, and I know there's people that prefer it that way, but whenever I went from Photoshop to Lightroom, it was definitely one of the best changes, at least software-wise, that I've ever made. But with that said, the learning curve from Photoshop to Lightroom was really strong because I had so much familiarity with Photoshop, which is more of like a photo manipulation software, and I never really had any experience with a traditional photo editing program like Lightroom. So in this video, I'm hoping to share everything that I wish I knew before jumping into Lightroom with you guys. That goes from how to import the photos, edit them fully, and then export them. These are going to be the pure basics of Adobe Lightroom. So with that said, we're going to hop over into Adobe Lightroom now and get started. Alright guys, so we're now inside of Adobe Lightroom. Now your screen may not look like this, may not look exactly like this, and if you guys have all of my photos on your screen, then you're some kind of wizard, and that's pretty awesome, but if your screen doesn't look exactly like this, that's alright. So what we're going to do is to start off, go to File, and then find Import Photos and Video. So at the top left of the screen, that very first button there, press File, and then find Import Photos and Video. So this is how we're going to import our file to start with. We need to import some photos. So I currently have my SD card that contains my photos in my hand here. Now with the File, Import Photos and Videos screen open, I'm going to insert the SD card to the SD card reader on my laptop. Let that go in. And then we're going to see that Lightroom immediately recognizes it, and sometimes it'll just open up the SD card with the photos on it, but sometimes like this you'll have to navigate. So my Lumix E drive, that's my I took the pictures on a Panasonic Lumix GX4, so it's a Lumix, and I'm gonna press on that right there and then find DCIM. Just basically navigate to wherever your photos are being held, and right there 132_pana, that's where my photos are at. So one more time, if I cancel that, it's File, then Import Photos and Video, and then we're going to find the place wherever we have our photos stored. So now as you can see, I have some raw photos here that I took of my cat and my laptop just so we had some photos on the SD card, and we also have some videos here and we see some check marks. So I don't want to import any videos because that's pretty unnecessary, so I'm going to uncheck those. And say I had some photos that I actually didn't want to import, like say I didn't really like how the photos of the laptop came out, so I'm just gonna not import those because I don't want them. And then we'll see that shot's underexposed, that one's underexposed as well, another one of the laptop. So basically we're going through and checking the pictures that we actually want to import to the computer. And now we can choose over here wherever we want our pictures to actually be stored. And I've been wanting to change this to go to my LaCie drive because I don't want them actually stored on my computer. So I'm going to import them to my LaCie drive. And now with all the photos checked that we actually want to import, I'll press import. And we're going to let that go real quick. Just watch those guys load up there. We can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now this process will speed up or slow down depending on the read speeds. And right there, all the photos have been imported. And if you have your Lightroom set to eject your SD card after the import is complete, it will eject your SD card like it did now. So now we have all of our photos on the computer. So with that done, we have now successfully imported photos into Lightroom. That's a pretty big accomplishment. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. That's incredible. So now the next question is, how do we actually edit these photos? My friend, that is simple. What we'll do is click on the photo that we want to actually edit, and I want to do that one, and I'm going to go to, after clicking on it, go to Window, and then go to Develop, and that's how we're going to get into this photo editing section of Lightroom. And now that you brought your photo to the Develop module, you can see down here that we have a whole bunch of other ones that we can choose from too. So all of our photos that we just imported are down here for us to edit. And this one, the shutter speed was actually too slow because it was a super bad lighting condition, and I'm using a micro four thirds sensor, so kind of hard to make that happen. But we can go through and maybe find a better one. That one is definitely not as motion blurry. So if you're wanting to jump from photo to photo, kind of see which one looks the best to you, pick out the ones that you like, you can definitely do that by just going to the develop module. So again, if you're at the library window, I usually click on a photo that I like, but then you don't actually have to do that. And then you go to window and then find develop, and you're going to find the basic corrections tab here, along with this bottom part where you can just, you know, move around and find the photos you like. And sometimes this will actually go away. If it does go away, it's just because you clicked that arrow down there, and click it again and it'll come back up. I've had that happen a couple times. So if you don't see these photos down here, it's just because that little arrow has been clicked. So just click it again, it'll come back. So if you've ever done any basic photo editing, these terms on the right side here will be familiar to you. You'll see temperature, which is white balance. You can bring that up if you have the incorrect white balance, especially if you're shooting in a RAW format. That's really easy to adjust using Lightroom. It's definitely one of my favorite adjustments in the software. You'll find tint, which you can bring the image to a pink or green tint. There's exposure, which is how bright or how dark your image is. Contrast, which is going to contrast out or decontrast your image against, it's going to contrast the shadows and highlights against each other. I personally love adding a lot of contrast to my images and sometimes decontrasting it to get that kind of faded look. And below that, you'll find the highlights, which are the brighter parts of the image. So if we bring that up, we'll see the fur gets lightened, the white in the laundry basket back there, there's some white on the floor there, and the light peeping through from the closet right there actually gets lightened up too. So the brighter parts of your image, that's the highlights, and the shadows are the darker parts. So you see your fur there. Basically anything in this image that is a shadow is gonna get either brightened or darkened. So those are those two. And then the whites and blacks, these are going to locate the brightest and darkest parts of your image. So if I bring these up, we'll see that it really brings out the brightest parts, and that's how you get really specific with the how bright you want the highlights to be or how dark you want the shadows to be. And sometimes I know a lot of people like to bring up the blacks right here to get kind of like a faded look. I see it a lot on Instagram. But that's the whites and the blacks. And then below that we have clarity, which this one's interesting. It's kind of like a mix of sharpening and saturation. It's a really weird adjustment. I personally don't like using it all that much, but in some cases it can get you kind of a cool look. I think it looks a little bit too artificial, so if you're using this, I'd recommend use it in a small amount, because if I bring that up all the way, it starts to look very weird. So that's clarity, something that I believe is specific to Lightroom. And below that you have vibrance, which is a saturation tool that I prefer to use more than the actual saturation adjustment itself. Vibrance is going to bring out the muted colors of your image. So if I bring this up, you're probably not going to see much of the blues increase, because with vibrance, it's going to bring out the colors that aren't really being shown off that much, while saturation is going to saturate every single color within the image. So if I bring up the vibrance, we'll probably see some oranges start to come out, the colors off of the fur there. It's going to try to locate the colors in your image that are a little bit muted, while saturation is just going to bring up all the colors. It doesn't really care about what can be seen the most and what cannot be seen the most. And you guys will see later on when I talk about the HSL tab, we can really mess with the colors using Lightroom very easily. So, but for saturation and vibrance, basically vibrance is going to bring out the muted colors in your image, while saturation is just going to boost the color overall. And below that we have the tone curve, which contains most of the things that we're talking about up here, but instead of just using sliders, which you can use sliders down here, which is a little bit interesting, but it basically contains everything up here, but you can do it in a visual form rather than just messing with the sliders. And really the only thing you need to know about this diagonal line here is that any adjustments made to the top of the line will increase the highlights, anything made to the bottom will increase the shadows, anything in the middle will increase and decrease the midtones. So for example, if I go to the top of the line and increase that, we'll see the highlights get boosted, and if I go down to the bottom and decrease that, we'll see the shadows start to get brought down. And the midtones are the tones that are in the middle. The photo editing software can't really detect whether it's a shadow or a highlight, so whatever falls into that category is considered a midtone. Now below that is the HSL tab, which is hue, saturation, and luminance. This is definitely my favorite tab in Adobe Lightroom because you're able to really dial in on a specific color or range of colors and manipulate them, change them, bring them up, bring them down. And Adobe Lightroom lays it out and just does it so well. So the first option here we have is hue. Now if you don't know what hue is, it's simply just a color or a shade of a color. And so whatever Adobe Lightroom picks up this color as, and now that's obviously a blue, right here we can see blue. If we bring that to the teal side, we'll be able to see the blue change into more of a teal. And for color grading, this tool is so beneficial because if you're looking for a specific color that you can't get on set, that you're like, oh, I want to get a teal look in this image, but we only have a blue light, you can definitely use that blue light and just very slightly bring it closer to a teal, and it looks really natural. Another color really heavy in this image is orange, and that's because the lights in this room are just absolutely orange. I don't know why, but they are not white at all. They're only orange. So lots of orange here. If we bring the orange down closer to a red, we can see that change. So hue, you're able to, whatever Adobe Lightroom picks up a color as, change that color very dramatically, or you can do it subtle as well. Now going below hue, we can see saturation. Now we saw a saturation adjustment up above, but in the HSL tab, we're able to key in on a specific color and change the saturation of that color. So going back to the blues, we're able to pump up the blues or bring them down. Now this adjustment can be really cool because if you have like a picture out in a field with a whole bunch of green, you're able to drown out that green or really bring out the greens using this adjustment. I'm going to bring the blues back in by taking that from -100 back to 0. And now going down here, we see luminance. Luminance is how bright or how dark a color will be. So with the blues, again, I can bring them up and make the blues lighter. If we watch there, going back to 100, watch the blue, bring it down to 0, we can see it gets darker. But we can also go down to the negatives and make the color darker. So with the HSL tab, you're really able to key in on specific colors and do a really nice color grade or color correction. All right, going back down the list from HSL, we can see detail where we have sharpening. We can bring up the sharpening, which is going to, the software is going to sharpen your image for you. So if we go into the image pretty deep, we can look, let's just watch this edge right here. If I bring the sharpening up, we can see it brings the noise out, which is something doing sharpening in post-production will do, because it's going to not just sharpen the image, but it's going to sharpen the noise in your image as well. So be careful with that, but it's going to try its best to sharpen your image and make it look like a higher quality than it actually is. Now going below that, there is noise reduction. And this photo does have a lot of noise, so that'll be good to demonstrate on this photo. So if we bring the noise reduction up, it's going to try its best to reduce the noise. And it did a really good job, but if we zoom out, the image starts to look a little bit muddy, which is something that'll happen when you do this. Honestly, I do a little bit of noise reduction, but don't crank that up to 100 because you start to look like you have a painting almost. Unless that's the style you're going for. I mean, it genuinely does look like a painting at this point. That's because the noise reduction is just going to really muddy up your image. So going from that to that, you can see what it does there. It kind of blurs the image almost. So a little bit of noise reduction goes a long way. So going farther down the list, we have lens corrections, where we have the option to remove chromatic aberrations and also enable profile corrections. And this one's kind of cool. In Lightroom, you have an option to select the make and model of the lens you're using to take the shot. In this shot, I was using a Sigma 18 to 35mm f1.8, and they actually have that in the software. And with some lenses, you'll find a little bit of distortion, where you'll find barrel warping, where the middle of the image will come out, and if I just take that off, you'll kind of see it. The middle of the image will sometimes come out and the sides will go in, or sometimes the sides will come out. If we look at that, we can see there's a slight amount of it. It's really nothing that's noticeable that I'd actually enable this for, but occasionally it's kind of bad if you're using a specific kind of lens. Mine doesn't do it too bad, but that's just something that's there just in case you ever need to use it. Going farther down the list, we have effects, where we have post-crop vignetting, where we can vignette the image, do whatever you want to it. If you go to the plus side on the amount, you'll find white, and going to the other side, you'll find black. So if you want a vignette in your image, you have that. And one of my favorite things, I wouldn't want to add it in this because there's already a lot of noise, but you can add artificial grain to your image, which is pretty cool. I like to use that on a lot. I take a lot of pictures of abandoned places in Texas, so I like to add grain to those photos. It looks pretty good. And you also have dehazing, which is an interesting tool to where if you have haze in your image, you can dehaze it. I'll be honest with you guys, I've never used this tool before. I actually kind of forgot it existed. So feel free to play with that on your own, because I don't really know what it does. Going to the negative side of things, it looks like we're in heaven and just about to meet Jesus. And on the other side, we just went straight into hell. So I mean, that's for you to play with, I guess. And our final tab is camera calibration, where we can tint our shadows to green or pink, and we also have a red primary, green primary, and blue primary hue and saturation adjustments, so you can really mess with these here if you want to. So now we've gotten ourselves familiar with the develop module, and what I want to do now is actually correct a photo live with you guys so you guys can see my full process for color correcting a photo. I would color correct this photo, but I'm honestly not too interested in doing that, so I'm gonna go ahead and bring in a different photo for you guys to edit. Alright, so this is the photo I decided to use. I chose this photo because I think the final outcome of it in the color grade and color correction will look really good. I want to bring out the blues in the sky, and also it's just an awesome looking photo. It was taken at the Austin Graffiti Park. The skyline there was really cool. I was a huge fan of it, so we took this photo, and the depth of field was awesome too. We were able to take it at an f2.0. So this is the photo I decided to use, and this is going to be kind of like a raw, uncut area of this video because I want to show you guys my full process for color correction and color grading, kind of how I'd go about this and my thoughts on it as we progress. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring up the contrast, and this is going to define out those highlights and the shadows. If you watch her shirt and the backpack, you'll see them start to get darker and the skies start to get brighter. So I'm going to bring the contrast to about 52, around there, and then the highlights are getting way too bright, so I'm going to bring those down, and you're also going to see the sky start to get a little bit more blue. And I think in this image we can just bring the highlights all the way down. And my girlfriend's standing in the shadowed area, so I'm going to bring her up because she's a little bit dark and she's the subject of the image here. And I think that looks pretty good. But now what I want to do is bring down the whites so the image isn't as bright. The sky is in the tone area. It is considered just one big white area, so if I bring that down, you'll see the sky start to get more blue, which is really cool. And the blacks, I think I'm going to bring those down to add some more contrast. Because if I bring those up, we'll see it starts to get really bright. So I want to bring that down. I'm going to guess somewhere around -20, maybe even lower than that, but not getting too low. So this is going to contrast if we watch her back, the backpack, the black of her shirt. We're going to see that start to get more contrasted. So about I'll call it between -20, -40, I'll say -30. So that looks good. And for the clarity, I don't usually mess with the clarity, but the vibrance, I'll bring that up so the blue starts to come out more, and the saturation, I'll increase that by like 7. So that's already looking way better. If I go about, let me do that. If I reset the image, we can already see that we have a way better image just with some simple color correction. Looks awesome. Honestly, I'm a huge fan of this already. So if we go down, we have the tone curve, and if you're wanting to get more precise with this here, which I'm gonna do, you can definitely use this, but if you can call it quits here and be like, all right, we're good. So for simple color correction, this is good. For more advanced stuff, the tone curve's awesome. I do actually use the sliders. I don't really like adjusting here. I just feel more comfortable using sliders. That's all up to preference though. So for highlights, I'm going to bring up the highlights, and that's going to make the sky in this part of her shoulder here a little bit brighter. So I bring that down. You can see just by increasing the highlights, we'll start to feel like the sky, the color in it is a little bit muted. So I'm going to bring that up by 50. So we get the sky brighter. That looks good. In the lights, honestly, I don't know if it looks good bringing it up or down, so I'm just going to leave that alone. The darks, I might just leave that alone too. And the shadows, I'm going to bring that up by like 3, just so, because she's considered a shadow in this image, it'll make her a little bit brighter. If we bring that up, it's mainly just her in the skyline, so I'll make that 3. Now going down here, we have HSL. I could go about changing the blues to a teal color if I wanted that kind of grade, and I could also make them more purple, which I don't really want to do that. I'm not really seeing anything in this image that I'd want to change the hue of in particular, but I do want to go down to the saturation and saturate the blues, because in this image we are seeing a whole lot of blue. We have blue jeans, we have, this is purplish, but it's starting to come off a little bit blue, and then the sky, of course. I'm going to bring up the saturation in the blue just a slight amount. I don't want to bring it up to that point there, but I want to make this image very blue. I think I'm going to settle for like 12. And now some could argue that this is a little bit too blue. In my opinion, it's not. I like having a color. I like colors and images. I really like color. I like to bring out one particular color or 2 colors or 3 colors. We usually don't go past that, but in this image, I'm seeing a lot of potential for blue. The contrast from her to the sky, the blue, it just looks fantastic to me. And if we look at the histogram, the blues are definitely up there. And now some people could say that that's too much. I personally think in this image, it looks great. This is all up to preference for sure. If you think that the blues look better here, that's up to you. I personally think at 12, the blue looks awesome. And now we have luminance. I think I'm gonna go about making the blues a little bit darker, not by that much, but probably by like a -9 or so, just so if we go, you can see that versus -9. It makes the blues, it's very subtle, but it makes them a little bit darker. It's not a huge change, but it's just something I'm going to do. And now for detail, if we go in, the image is already pretty sharp, but we can go in and sharpen it if we want to. I usually just do about 25 on the sharpen. That's typically what I do. And I'll leave radius and detail at the original settings. And then we have noise reduction. This image is well exposed, so noise isn't a huge problem. And now we could go into the effects and add in some vignetting, which I think I will do. So if we bring that down, we can see that there. In the midpoint, we can, I think, to bring that down, and then probably bring this like -5. Here we go. And the roundness, let's see, doing a very slight key in, just bringing that right to the center. So that looks good to me. And grain. In this image, you'd really be able to see the grain. So if I bring the grain up, we can see it being put in there. It's pretty much just looks like noise. But for certain aesthetics, if that's what you're looking for, grain looks awesome, especially in Lightroom. I usually like for grain, if I were to add grain to this image, I'd probably go about saying like 36 or so would look good. Again, that a lot of this stuff is totally up to preference. If you like adding 100% grain to your shot, then dude, go for it for sure. Like that's badass if you want it to look like that. But that's pretty much it for color correction and color grading in the shot. I'm pretty happy with it. And if you guys, one thing I forgot to mention that I love doing, if you do the backslash, you're able to preview the before and after your corrections. So if you press backslash, press it again, it actually lets you see what your image looks like without the color grade and color corrections. So that's before and that's after. And I'm very happy with that. My goal for this was to properly color correct the image and then color grade the image by adding in a lot more blue. So there we go. Now we've imported some photos and we've color corrected and color graded our image, and now we need to export it. So how do we do that? I'm glad you asked. Very simple, my friends. Let's go down to whatever photo we were editing. You may have a lot more photos here, or you may just have one like I have here. But just go down to the photo that you were editing. You'll be able to tell it's the photo you're editing with this white border. Right click on that and then find export. It's right down here at the bottom. Find that export button, then click export. And you'll find a whole lot of options here. And for export location, you're able to click choose and then find wherever you want to export the photo to. Totally subjective. File naming, you can let it do its own thing, but what I prefer to do is go to edit and then just name the photo. So it's currently named before.jpg. I'll just name this like test, whatever, and then press done. And when I'm exporting a batch of photos from a photo shoot, I'll name it something specific. Like if we did photo shoots, then the date was 5/21/17, and then I do like a colon and then do image 1 or something. And then going through all the images, I'd export and press image 2, edit, image 3, and so forth. That's what I prefer to do. But you can just let Lightroom do its own thing, or you can just name it whatever you want. I'll name this test, for example. Now going farther down is the thing that really matters. This can be subjective. I mean, there's people that are going to tell you to do it this way or do it that way. What I prefer to do is just export the image as a JPEG with the quality set all the way to 100. And for my color space, I set that to sRGB. And you can also limit the file size. I don't typically do that, but if you want to, you totally can. These are my personal export settings. I've been happy with every image that I've ever exported in this format. So again, subjective. If you want to export it as a PSD, TIFF, DNG, or original so it comes out out to be, it's not going to be a RAW file. I thought it was going to be a RAW file, but it's actually a JPEG. But if you wanted it to export as a RAW, again, you can totally do that. That's all up to you. But for mine, that's JPEG quality 100 in the sRGB color space. Now you have your export location, file named, the quality of the image, the format. Then all you have to do is just press export, and the photo is exported to wherever you exported it to. And one more thing before I go that I want to mention is that for getting to the develop module, you can also use these things up here. I don't know why. I think this is probably just because I'm self-taught and this is how I learned to get to the develop module. I go to window and then go to develop, but you can also just go right here and press these guys too. Those work just as well. The same thing for getting to the library. So if you're wanting to do that instead of going to window, develop, you can totally do that as well. All right, well, those are the basics of Adobe Lightroom. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you liked it, make sure to give it a like. And if you guys have any questions or comments about anything that I covered in this video at all, feel free to leave it down below. And as always, my Instagram is located down below. That's at CRW Lancaster. That's where I'll be posting all of my photography, videography, and directing work. Again, thank you guys for watching this video. My name is Caleb Lancaster, and I'll see you all in the next one.